New Zealand before heading to Australia. The Lions weren't alone on the boat. Also on board were 300 stoats and weasels who were brought over to eliminate New Zealand's rabbit problem. The first ever Lions captain, Robert Seddon, died of drowning midway through the tour while sculling on a river. Andrew Stoddart, who was another of the cricketers there, took over and was the star of the tour. The next one was the first to get official recognition from the RFU against the newly formed Springboks. Although the Lions won the series and beat the Boks again 5 years later, in the 12 series since in South Africa, they've only won 2. New Zealand has proved an even tougher hunting ground, just the 1 series win for the Lions in 11 attempts, which came in 1971. And then there was that nail-shredding drawn series in 2017, only the second in Lions history. Only once have the Lions clinched a series after losing the first test, 1989, when David Campese's infamous ghost pass was pounced upon by Ian Evans. Before World War II, the Lions had a dark blue strip, which on the 1930 tour forced the All Blacks to play in all white. So in 1950, the iconic red shirts, white shorts and blue and green socks combination was born. It remains the symbol of the greatest alliance of adversaries in all of sport. To borrow the phrase from Jim Telfer, the Lions is Everest.
Yeah, good evening one, good evening all, and welcome once again to your Sunday night fix of European, indeed world football here on Trans-Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly. With me for the next 3 hours, given that Andy Brassell once again is taking his family on an annual holiday that usually involves showing them obscure third-tier football grounds in Portugal and beyond. I'm delighted to say Daniele Fisichella will be with us for the next 3 hours. He's not the only one. We have got an amazing amount of brilliant guests for you tonight. Terry Gibson will join us to talk about Spanish football. Eric Bildman will bring us all the latest from France. John Blair has an amazingly lovely book about football Italia in the golden age of the 80s and 90s, about the kits and the characters of the Galazzo era. Jonathan Wilson has written a new book about the history of the World Cup, the power and the glory. The great Jonathan Wilson will join us as well. Tim Vickery will join us from South America. It should be a belting 3 hours. We're really glad to have you along for the ride. It's the first Trans-Europe Express on talkSPORT's new super technical television and radio studio in London. Neither Daniele or I are actually there. That's how we roll on Trans-Europe Express. Trans-Europe Express. Good evening, Daniele. How are you?
Good evening, Danny. I'm very, very well. Very excited for this show we got coming on.
Yeah.
And of course, a few days separated from the start of the season in the 5 major leagues. So yeah, we are almost there.
Although you could argue there's one very large game only 3 days away in Udine on Wednesday, yeah?
Yes, of course, the Super Cup and between Spurs and
someone
and
else, yeah.
And someone else, PSG, the champions of Europe, who have only had 8 days to prepare the match. So I dare to say, Danny, it's in your hands.
Yeah, well, Spurs must start favourites, surely, yeah. Daniel, let us start. What a great show we've got lined up. I say that, knowing that you'll be the judge of that. Of course you will. But I'm confident that there's enough fantastic content here. If you're any way interested in European football, you will be sated, my friend, sated. Daniel, let's start with the nominations for the Ballon d'Or. And whatever you feel about, as I do, about individual awards not being, and the Ballon d'Or in particular, over the years has been tainted by competition between two players. And it hasn't been, I think, judged very well by the rest of the world. But it is clearly something that people are very interested in. So the most interesting thing about it, if I may be so bold, is the arrival of Scott McTominay. That's a long list. The short list is a very long list, right? But Scott McTominay is on that list. We've talked about it a lot here on Trans Europe Express. But Daniele, because you're not on every week, I'd love to get your take on this, and you watch a lot of Serie A. What has Scott McTominay, who was, after all, surplus to requirement at Manchester United, what has he done at Napoli, apart from winning the Scudetto, to get himself onto this list? Because it's a pretty surprising... If I'd said he was going to be on the list 14 months ago, you'd think I was insane.
Yeah, you probably will not be the only one. But now, officially, Scott McTominay is amongst the 50 best players in the world, at least for last season, because that's what the short list says. And the Scott deserves it because, as you mentioned, he won the title with Napoli. He was one of the main figures for Napoli to win the Scudetto, scored 13 goals, gave six assists. But behind the numbers is the performances and the way he adapted to the style of play of Napoli, and he was so important for them. The majority of those goals were the opening goals of games. That's why he earned the nickname of bottle opener back in Napoli. But the way he fit into the team and also changed the way he played, not much of a constructor, of a builder, but more of a rider into the area, and the way he has imposed his physicality, the way he has outmuscled the majority of these opponents in Serie A, have earned him, of course, the respect of the Italian media. Perhaps they didn't know him very well, but also brought him to the international stage. Winning a title in Napoli is not an easy feat. It was only the fourth Scudetto of Napoli history, but of course, making in the way that McTominay has done in his first season in Serie A, I believe he is the best story, is the nicest story of this Ballon d'Or short list. Let's be honest, he won't win it. It probably be one between Dembele and Yamal, but for me, and for many other people, is the moral winner already of this contest.
Daniele, I'll return to what he's done to change his game, because it's clearly different from what he was doing in Manchester. But you mentioned there something that I really want to focus on. And in the last couple of years, I believe that the Premier League has become far and away the most physically demanding league in world football. We're seeing the players, if you're a great player, you can be 5'4" and still be a great player. But we're seeing bigger and bigger, faster and faster, stronger and stronger players injected into Premier League teams, partially because of the competitiveness of the tournament itself. And I think, whereas Scott did not look to be more than an averagely physically strong Premier League player, maybe a little bit above average, in Italy, he has really taken advantage of the fact that he is a super athlete.
Absolutely. I think the fact that he comes from a league where the pace is quicker has obviously helped McTominay taking Serie A by a storm, because it's no secret that in Italy teams are not as physical, they don't press as intensively as they do in the Champions League or in the Premier League. And that, of course, for a player that perhaps when he arrived in Italy lacked a little bit of confidence as well, following few disappointing seasons at Manchester United, although he was never the culprit or the worst player, I would say, someone who always put a shift. I think McTominay obviously took advantage to it. Look, the Italian league is slower. McTominay looked like a Rolls Royce, really, as soon as he stepped into the league. Now the big question mark is, can he repeat himself? Because 13 goals in one season are a big feast for a midfielder. And of course, Napoli last season only played in the league and were knocked out of the Italian Cup very early, so really only had to focus in one game per week. Now we know with Champions League and with this expanded Champions League, the pressure is much higher. And I would expect perhaps McTominay not to start every single game and be part of the rotation in order to keep fresh, keep fit when he's needed the most. But of course, the second season is the more difficult one. Also, the Italian defenses will be more accustomed to the way McTominay rides into the box. But of course, for as a first season goes, really, it's probably unique. Worth mentioning that he becomes the first Scot to be nominated for the Ballon d'Or since Ali McCoist, of course, which is one of our colleagues.
Your TalkSport colleague Ali McCoist will probably thank you for mentioning that. Exactly.
Ali McCoist in 1987, and he finished 21st, by the way, the year the Ballon d'Or was won by Ruud Gullit. So, what a great honor for Scott McTominay to be in that mold.
Yeah, we'll talk more about Napoli later, because the other problem Scott will have next season is fitting into what is essentially a new team, as they have really, really been active in the transfer market and not buying reserves, buying starters. The other thing I think is notable here, and I'm not sure all of our listeners will be very comfortable to hear this, but my guess is, and I don't have a vote, Daniele, but my guess is that the only Premier League player who will finish in the top 10 will be Mohamed Salah. What does that say then about the strength of the Premier League, which of course, we think is all powerful, has won 2 of the 3 European trophies this season? I'd expect Chelsea to win the conference, to be fair. But the players are not getting votes, I suspect, in this vote, for the Ballon d'Or.
The Ballon d'Or is a prize that rewards the winners. Therefore, if you play in a team that wins something, you probably get more votes, and that's why one between Dembele or Yamal is going to win it and not Salah. But also, it says that being the Premier League so competitive with 3 or 4 teams that can really win it and they go toe-to-toe for a long time of the season is much more draining. And of course, those teams are built perhaps to win the domestic league. And then they had some issues in Europe, but perhaps it all hinged for Salah in that round of 16 against PSG. Liverpool were particularly unlucky to draw PSG in the round of 16. And also they were stopped by an exceptional goalkeeper like Donnarumma. So again, it's small details as well. Had they come through, probably Salah would have probably been in the top 3, perhaps, who knows, won the Ballon d'Or. But another mention, maybe for another English player or Premier League player, it could be Cole Palmer. Again, another outsider, somebody perhaps would not have thought to finish in the top 10. But he's proven to be the man for the big occasions, the Conference League final, the Club World Cup final. And I think that's probably where English fans will look at and say, okay, here we got a really good prospect. Is somebody that, in the next 3 or 4 years can really become the centerpiece of the England national team. But yeah, but as far as Premier League players go, of course, Erling Haaland having had an average season, yes, of course, it doesn't add to the complexity that, would probably only one player will finish in the top 10.
Okay, and there's a chance for you to vote in our poll tonight about the Ballon d'Or. Who is the current favourite to win the Ballon d'Or? We've given you 4 choices. One is Kavicha Kvaratskhelia. The other is Ousmane Dembele. Yet another is Lamine Yamal. And the 4th is other. And if you vote other, please put the name of the people below who you think should be winning the Ballon d'Or. I have to say that if I had a vote, and I do not, I would vote for Kvaratskhelia. You rarely win 2 league titles and a Champions League in one season, and he's been absolutely brilliant, of course, particularly at Paris in the second half of the season. But you can go and vote there. It's a Twitter vote, so go to @talkSPORT on Twitter/X, or @Danny Kelly Words or Daniele Fisichella, and you can vote in that poll. Already, thousands of you have actually. It's still pretty close between the 2 outstanding candidates. Go and vote there now. I'm deliberately cutting this section short because I'm really looking forward to our next guest. Terry Gibson has been an expert on Spanish football for the past 30 years. You see and hear him on the television. He joins us next to talk about everything that's going on in that great footballing country. You're listening to Trans Europe Express with Danny Kelly and Daniele Fisichella. And we're really, really glad to have you along for the ride. Well, I'm hoping for an absolutely belting 3 hours. Thanks for being here. welcome back everybody to the second section of today's edition of Trans Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly. With me is Daniele Fisichella. And we've got a special guest for you next, because next up we're going to talk about Spain and everything's been going on in that football country. Joining us now on the line, I'd like to say Terry Gibson, friend of the show. Hello Terry, how are you?
Good evening Danny, good evening Danny. Very well, thank you.
Good to hear from you, Terry. Where do we start? Let's start with one of your favourite subjects, the never-ending chaos at Barcelona, where last week we were reporting that Andre ter Stegen was causing trouble. This week it's all back. He's been reinstated as captain. Tell us what's happening there.
Well, they've just had their last pre-season friendly. It's half-time, actually. They're winning 4-0 against Como. And it's the traditional Gamper Trophy. It's obviously not in the main stadium. It's at the training ground, which is still the Cruyff Stadium, which is a very nice little arena. And he addressed the crowd tonight as the captain. So he's fully reinstated as captain. Interestingly, he did it in his number 1 jersey. And Joan Garcia, who's playing in goal for Barcelona tonight, was also wearing the number 1 jersey. So you can see how petty it has become. It's very similar to what we saw from Frankie de Jong in years gone by, where the club do seem to want to move a player on, and Barcelona, they use the dark arts. They try and force players out. This has changed. Ter Stegen got injured last season. Prior to that, everything in the garden was rosy. He was the club captain. But since his injury, since his recovery from that knee operation, it's been clear that they want to move him out. Now, I don't know the full sort of understanding fully why they want him out. They've spent money on a new goalkeeper, and ter Stegen has become the supporters have even turned against him, which I find baffling for a player that's won so much with Barcelona. The supporters have turned on him. They tended to favour Szczesny instead of ter Stegen, which was bizarre. And it's led down to this road now where ter Stegen is standing his ground. He has the support of the players, because I think the players are fully aware that they could be next in this scenario. So they gathered around Frankie de Jong when the club were trying to move him out, and Rafinha to a certain extent last summer. And this summer it's Marc-Andre ter Stegen. It's all down to the fact about his knee injury, his back injury that he's picked up in pre-season training. It required surgery. And if you're out until the next transfer window, it frees up 80% of the players' wages to be spent on someone else. So, they brought in Joan Garcia, who they want to be the number 1 goalkeeper. They brought in Marcus Rashford, who's on big wages as well. So I think that they were hoping that they could rule out ter Stegen until at least the next transfer window. He would agree to that, and therefore they could register the 2 new players that they've signed. In the last week, Inigo Martinez has left the club. He's gone to play in Saudi Arabia. So that's freed up his wages. So everything appears at the moment as if it's going to be all okay. And the relationship between ter Stegen and Barcelona is back to normal, just.
So the obvious question, Terry, then, is with the two, with Martinez moving on and ter Stegen to effectively being deregistered till the new year, does that mean that obviously the goalkeeper, Garcia, will be one of those? Will Rashford be actually registered for the start of the new Spanish season?
I think he will, and I thought he would be anyway. I can't imagine a scenario where they signed Marcus Rashford on loan and he wasn't going to be able to be registered. So I think that's going to be all clear, and I'm pretty certain he'll be registered to play for Barcelona when the league season starts next weekend. So I thought that would always be the case. I think Inigo Martinez moving on makes that a whole lot easier now. So they've moved players out as well. Marcus Rashford essentially is a swap for Ansu Fati, who's gone on loan to Monaco. So it's interesting watching him tonight. I was watching the first half of the game against Como. He made a fantastic goal for Rafinha. He missed an absolute sitter, which would have been a sensational goal after an individual run. Rounded the goalkeeper, a tap in from 6 yards, and he put it past the near post. But he's playing well. He looks sharp. Barcelona playing their usual style, and he looks like he's fitting him really well, to be honest. So I can't imagine a scenario where he's not registered for the first game of the season.
Very a good win tonight for Barcelona. And tomorrow, perhaps an even better news for them, because the Spanish FA will debate whether one of their games, the games against Villarreal, could take place in Miami this December, which would be historical for them. And we know it is something that the clubs and also Jose Tebas are really, the president of the FA, of course, has really pushed on forward. How do you think this is going to go?
I don't think it'll go down too well in Spain. I think, particularly with Barcelona fans, I think, yes, it brings attention to the club. It sets a precedent for not only for La Liga, but for the rest of the leagues in Europe as well. I think when you look at the Spanish Super Cup, which has been taken to Saudi Arabia for the last few years and will do for the next few years, that hasn't gone down too well either. I understand why La Liga want to probably be the first league to break away and have this one game a season, or at least one game a season, played in a foreign country, on a different continent. So, yes, I get the reasons behind it, but I think if you're a supporter of Barcelona, you're missing a game, and you know they're not going to be too pleased. So, you're never going to satisfy everybody with this. It'd be a huge occasion. I'm sure Messi would be in attendance watching if Barcelona do appear to play Villarreal. It's interesting. We've heard it before. It's not happened yet, and it remains to be seen whether this will be the case.
Serie A is thinking to do the same, Terry, by the way. Probably Milan Como will be played in Perth in Australia in February. But yeah, it looks like La Liga could be really the first.
Interesting thing is we move on to Atletico Madrid. They have signed Raspadori from Napoli. That's not been announced yet, but we know it's happening. And Ruggeri from Atalanta. And Daniele would tell you neither of those were guaranteed starters for Napoli or Atalanta. So who's got this right? Atletico Madrid or the clubs in Italy who weren't playing these players regularly?
Well, Atleti, it was interesting because we all thought last season that Atleti had the squad that was capable of winning the league. They had the strongest squad. They had the strongest squad in terms of depth. We saw Real Madrid suffer during the season because they lacked numbers defensively. Atleti had two complete teams, but they never lived up to what we expected. It seems that Simeone has gone on a cull, and we wondered how he was going to actually make that squad better. He's got rid of everyone that was 30 or older and brought in younger players. So it appears that the plan is going to be exactly the same. They do work hard. They work harder than Barcelona. They work harder than Real Madrid. They work harder than most teams in La Liga. But last season, perhaps he feels they weren't capable of maintaining that hard work for 90 minutes, particularly against the big teams, the big in the Champions League, particularly in La Liga. So it looks like the plan is going to be the same. But when you look at the ages of the players that have been signed, comparing that to the likes of Azpilicueta and Axel Witsel and Ranildo, who's 31, he's left. Sal Niguez has left the club. Rodrigo de Paul has left the club, all over 30. So it looks to me as if that's the plan from Simeone. He's gone for a younger age group in order to try and, the likes of Johnny Cardoso has come in, who's a really good player. I haven't seen anything of Thiago Almeida. They bought from Botafogo for over 20 million euros. Alex Baena, I know very well from Villarreal. He's a young man, 23 years of age. So they've reduced the age of the squad, and that seems to be the plan from Simeone. So it'd be interesting to see what the Italians, how they fit in. I mean, Ruggeri is only 22, isn't he, Daniele? He's a young player as well. Yeah. So you can see the plan from Simeone. Hard work. He thinks they're talented enough. They don't often get players wrong when they make signings at Atletico Madrid.
You say you haven't seen much from Terry. I can tell you from watching Argentina in recent months, he is a fantastic player, and he has started to make Argentina's national team tick. And what they're hoping for, I guess, is that if he can link up with Julian Alvarez the way he does with the Argentina national side, then something really spectacular will happen, because they seem to have a tremendous understanding. And no less than Lionel Messi has gone, whoa, look at those two go. Not all good news for the big clubs. One of your favourite players over the years, Terry, from talking to you and working with you, Isco, out for about 3 months. Huge blow.
Do you know what I was thinking about this? I don't think there's a more important player to his team in La Liga than Isco. Because, if Real Madrid, if they're missing players, they've still got an array of talent that they can pull upon. Same with Barcelona, same with Atletico Madrid. But for Real Betis, Isco is the be-all and end-all. I mean, it becoming a bit of a mockery last season, and maybe the season before, that he won every single man of the match award that was given. And working out there on the television, you knew it was inevitable at the end of the game, because he played well again, and he clearly was the most important player on the pitch. that he was going to win that. He must have won over 50% of the man of match awards in the games that he played last season. So I can't imagine how they're going to replace him. They're not going to look outside. They've got their own issues with the Spanish financial fair play. They've got concerns over players that they've signed. They've signed quite a few. They've sold quite a few. Quite a big turnaround. And so I don't think they can go out and spend some money to replace Isco. It is 3 months. They'll be hoping it's shorter and not longer. But he is so important to Real Betis. He makes them tick. Everything goes through him. He's become an icon at a club, and it's quite ironic when you think that when he left Real Madrid, he went to Sevilla across the city, and didn't play a game hardly, fell out with Monchi. I think he got physical at one stage. There was accusations that Monchi got physical with Isco. Isco left, had some time out of the game, and went back to Betis, of all places, and has become an absolute hero and a really popular personality in Spanish football now.
And Terry, we need to throw you under whatever the Spanish for bus is, and I suppose it's bus. Barcelona were the champions last year. Nobody was quite predicting that, I think, at the start of the year. Have Madrid got enough to close the gap this year?
I think there's so much to learn about Real Madrid, because the new signings, is it going to be a new system of play? It did appear to be so in the Club World Cup. You thought everything was coming along nicely for Xabi Alonso, and they got hammered by PSG. It's up in the air, I think. And I did wonder whether Barcelona would change at all, because, you know, you look at that high defensive line, it served them well, but they did concede, I think, 7 goals against Inter over 2 legs. There were 1 or 2 other games where you probably felt that, you know, if teams are sussing them out, are they sussing out this high offside trap? I've watched them pre-season, they're doing exactly the same. They're not going to change. The only difference will be Inigo Martinez isn't going to be there. So it does give Araujo an opportunity. He was quicker than Inigo Martinez, so that might be a help. But it's going to be the same from Barcelona. But Real Madrid, it's a big question mark. Likewise with Atletico Madrid. I didn't have Barcelona to win the league last season. I was not aware of the impact that Hansi Flick could have and would have, not just in them being successful, but changing them their style of play so quickly and successfully right from the very start of the season. So I would place Barcelona favourites, despite the fact that Real Madrid have made some signings. But that's only because I'm not fully sure yet whether they're going to be playing a back 4 or a 3 at the back. Who's going to be playing up front? Is it going to be 2 up front? Because that hasn't worked out yet. Seeing him in the Club World Cup, when Mbappe was fit, he played down the middle. Vinicius still played out on the left, but they had Fran Garcia playing on the left wing back, and that was kind of clogged up down that left flank. So I think we've got a lot to learn about Xabi Alonso and Real Madrid, but they have the talent, and they have a better depth in their squad this season, that's for sure.
Terry, do you still love the Spanish football?
Absolutely, Danny. It's my 23rd season this year, going in initially as a scout for Manchester City, in my 18th season involved in broadcasting. So, yep, I miss it when it's not around. As I say, I'm watching the Barcelona game live now on YouTube. Yep, looking forward to working next weekend. I'm out in Dublin at Premier Sports next week. We've got most of the games on UK television. So I'm doing the Espanyol Atletico Madrid game, then going out to Madrid to do Real Madrid Osasuna on Tuesday. So can't wait, looking forward to it.
Always great to talk to you, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us here on Trans Europe Express, where next myself and Daniele will be looking at what everything's been going on in Germany, including 2 very big sales, one confirmed, one very much in the offing for RB Leipzig, who also, of course, look like they're going to bring in a big signing from the Premier League. That's coming up next here on Trans Europe Express.
Fisichella. Danny Kelly also joining us later, having some broadcasting issue as we go through the major stories across the continent, and we touched on, of course, La Liga, Scott McTominay being nominated for the Ballon d'Or, and we'll talk more about the greatest story around Europe, and in particular the Bundesliga in the next 10 minutes, with a couple of interesting developments regarding two players. One that is reported officially joined a Premier League club, Manchester United. Of course, we're talking about Benjamin Sesko, the striker, the very much sought after from Manchester United this summer from Leipzig, the centre forward that the Red Devils really needed. It has been confirmed, moved to Old Trafford. And another player that perhaps is going to join a Premier League club shortly, and is, of course, Xavi Simons with me, of course, and in the company of Danny Kelly, who's back. Danny.
I think I'm back. Can you hear me there properly there, Daniela?
Yes, of course.
That's very good.
I can hear you.
We're having some kind of issues here. New studio, you're bound to get some teething troubles, aren't you? First of all, we should talk about Sesko, because Manchester United have completely re-upped their forward line. Three massive new signings. It's a real big change. From what you've seen of him, will Sesko be any more successful than Rasmus Højlund has been in that Manchester United team?
Well, they hope so, especially in front of goals, and they hope Manchester United, the Sesko, could bring with him that clinical side of his game and that explosiveness that made him one of the best strikers in the Bundesliga in the last few years. But of course, Sesko's been a target for Manchester United for a long time. They could have signed him in 2019 when he was just 16. They could have signed him in 2022 under Erik ten Hag, and now finally they got him for over 70 million euros. Look, Sesko is young, but is a player that has already shown his ability, his skills, physically strong, tall, 193 centimeters, so built for the Premier League with a very good pace, blistering pace, and really good at playing on the defense's shoulders, good dribblers, good striker of the ball, as I mentioned before, really explosive. But of course, the question mark is around the number of goals that he can score, and can he score consistently. He's been a scorer of great goals, but perhaps not yet a great goal scorer in the Bundesliga. 27 goals in 64 appearances, and perhaps he is carrying along the tag of being a little bit wasteful, although in the last season he has done much better. He actually outperformed his expected goals by a good tally, by 3.14. He will be under more pressure now, of course, at Old Trafford, and that's really what matters, and we will see what he's really made of.
Yeah, just to stick with Leipzig for a second, it also looks like Xavi Simons will go probably to Chelsea, and they're doing a kind of swap deal with the Premier League, because all the news tonight is that the highly rated Harvey Elliott of Liverpool, who perhaps struggle for minutes in the Premier League champions midfield, is going the other way to Germany.
I think it would be a good move for Harvey Elliott, because he will be guaranteed to play regularly, but a bit of a shame, I think, for English football to let Harvey Elliott go to a team, RB Leipzig, that, let's not forget, hasn't qualified for the Champions League. So career-wise, probably a step backwards for the young Englishman who's done so well at the Under-21 Championship. But for Xavi Simons, it looks like the complete package. A player that looks very eager to do well, has got the right attitude, really hard working, plenty of skills, good dribbles, good striker of the ball, good engine as well. I mean, last season, by far the best player alongside Sesko in RB Leipzig. 11 goals, 8 assists, not enough, of course, for them to qualify for the main European competition. But I think he will be. He looks ready. He looks ready to go and move into a bigger club. There is also rumors that perhaps RB Leipzig will want back Christopher Nkunku. a former player who's moved to Chelsea hasn't quite worked out, also because of many physical issues as well. Perhaps they could sign both, Harvey Elliott and Christopher Nkunku as well. But yes, I think for Chelsea, bringing Simmons again will be one more option to what it looks like already an extremely talented forward line.
Let's look at Bayern Munich then for a moment. Kingsley Coman appears to be going to Saudi Arabia, to Al Nasser, for 25 million euros. But that means they've let go of Coman, Sane, Thomas Muller during this transfer window, and Jamal Musiala, we know, is out for months, God bless him, at least till the new year. Who will play at 10 for Bayern now?
That is the question, because Bayern, out of a sudden, who, by the way, Bayern who host Leipzig in the first game of the season, so not an easy fixture for them. Look a little bit short in the creative department, and let's not forget they haven't signed yet a replacement for Harry Kane. Of course, there is Luis Diaz playing up front. There is Michael Olise playing on the other flank. But of course, a creative number 10, somebody who could ignite the spark, could be needed. The chances probably will be for Serge Gnabry, a player that perhaps has been forgotten. He's been a regular starter for Bayern for many years, but now in the last season always become almost the first or second substitute to come onto the pitch. So that is the tricky question really for Vincent Kompany, unless Bayern will go big on the Stuttgart forward Walter Made, who's done so well last season, or going into double figures, done really well at the Euros as well. But Stuttgart has resisted that temptation to sell the tall striker this summer. Also, some Italian clubs have inquired about him, so probably will try to hang on to him a little bit more. But yeah, with Musiala being out for at least a couple of months, so at least October, November, yes, Bayern could struggle, I guess, to get goals and to get a little bit of creativity coming forward.
Listen, thank you very much indeed. Why don't we take another break and we'll get another guest on next. Eric Bilderman is one of our regular experts on French football. We'll talk to him about, among other things, Donnarumma, who may be one of the best goalkeepers in the world, but may also be the most unwanted player on the planet. That's next here on Trans Europe Express. Yeah, Daniele Fisichella and me, Danny Kelly, at the controls this evening here on Trans-Europe Express. We're going to turn our attention now, as I said earlier, using that phrase that I've really got to try and find an alternative to. We're going to talk about this better one. We're going to talk about France. To help us do that, we're joined, as we often are, by Eric Bielderman. Hello, Eric.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Hello.
Really good. Thank you for joining us. We must talk about Donnarumma because in the latter stages of the Champions League, he looked like the best goalkeeper in the world again, and yet nobody, they've signed Chevalier now from Lille as the French number 2, so presumably they want to move Donnarumma on, but nobody seems to want to buy him or pay his extraordinary wages. What do you make of this?
The situation is tricky at the moment. Donnarumma made some statement publishing a picture of himself with his family with a cake, and on the cake was written #1. So that was a kind of a provocative message towards Paris Saint-Germain. The meaning is that I don't want to go, I still have a contract, and I want to go for a fight with Chevalier. That's, I would say, a kind of unofficial statement from Donnarumma. Behind that, we know that till at the end of August, a lot of things can happen. And if a club like Man United was said to be interested, clubs like that do come, we do feel that Donnarumma will not try to lose a year being on the bench with Paris Saint-Germain, because behind that we have the World Cup in 2026. So you can't, even if it's very comfortable money-wise and to live in Paris and blah, blah, you have a World Cup to play, so you need to play consistent football.
But Eric, looking at the situation with Donnarumma, today when Chevalier was presented by PSG, on the website of PSG, he says he's also an excellent goalkeeper with his feet, which sounds like almost a dig at Donnarumma. Now, the issue with Donnarumma is, I mean, this season he had one of the best seasons in the PSG shirt. I don't remember any mistake this season from Donnarumma. So is it because he doesn't fit in with Luis Enrique's style of play? We know that Donnarumma is not excellent with his feet. Is it because he's got a very high contract that he wants to extend? Is there something else? Maybe he hasn't quite gelled with the fans. How can they let him go, such an extraordinary goalkeeper?
I think there is two main reasons, and they are all from Luis Enrique. The first one, you just wisely mentioned it, the lack of ability to play with his feet. The second one, even if he did improve in the last 6 months, he is regarded as not very consistent when he has to go forward from his goal line on the corner kick, on the center, in the air. And what is very strange to us and to Luis Enrique, because I'm speaking not on my vision but on Luis Enrique's vision, is that he's such a tall goalkeeper and is so great on his line and to go on the grass to catch a ball and in the air, despite his body, I would say, he is not among the very best in the world. So that's the two Luis Enrique vision. Behind that, Paris Saint-Germain have made an offer to him, which was sending a negative message in, because the offer was not to keep everything that he had in his previous contract. So the meaning, when you are an agent, a manager, or when you are a world-class player, you know the message that we won't make everything to keep you with us. So the message is, if you find an open gate to go, you can go.
I mean, he must be on extraordinary money, wages-wise. Is that going to be the big stumbling block, Eric?
Yeah, the money, of course, the money when you play for Paris Saint-Germain, except Man City and maybe a couple of Real Madrid, a couple of clubs in Europe, you have no chance to find the same wages. But then you can have a long-term contract, which can give you on a 5 or 6 years length, I would say quite big money. And you know nowadays that if a player, when comes the right time to make huge money, he can go or he will go to Saudi Arabia. So money-wise speaking, when you have the opportunity to play for one of the top 8 European clubs and have a chance to compete for the Champions League once again, or to the Premier League, to the Spanish League, La Liga, how can you refuse if in the meantime you stay on the bench with Paris Saint-Germain? That's dreadful.
Eric, this issue, do you think might affect the PSG going into the next game, which, by the way, is the first game they play in a month, so the Super Cup against Spurs? And also considering they've only seen each other 8 days ago, so basically they had no pre-season. That must feel extraordinarily weird for everyone who supports PSG in France.
Yeah, I think the first months of the French league, everybody would have been happy to have been one of the opponent of Paris Saint-Germain, because they will play with a kind of a B team and sometimes a kind of a B-C team. So, of course, it's the right time to play Paris Saint-Germain. We know that whatever happens, if they lose a couple of points in August and in September, the team will be ready to compete within, I would say, the mid-September. And in the French league, the advantage that they do have in terms of the quality of the squad, they will still be huge, very huge favorite for the title, even if this season, I have the feeling, and I'm not the only one to have this feeling, that Marseille, Monaco have done very well on the transfer market, and they won't be maybe 20 points behind Paris Saint-Germain, which is usually the case in the last couple of years.
I told you, Danny, the Super Cup is Spurs to lose. Eric just confirmed it.
Okay, well, I'll be very happy if that's how it turns out to be. Eric, finally, Zabani has gone to Paris Saint-Germain from Bournemouth, and they're replacing him with Bafodé Diakité from Lille. What kind of a centre-back are Bournemouth getting?
Sorry, I didn't understood the question. Who are you talking about? Sorry.
Diakité, the centre-back that's going from Lille to Bournemouth.
Oh, there, I think it's a physical. It's a good. I would say, modern style defender. He has some technical quality, but also is a very, very physical type of defender. But in the meantime, Bournemouth have lost Zaberny to go to Paris Saint-Germain, the Ukrainian defender. I don't know because I don't know too much about this player who is coming now to Paris Saint-Germain. I don't know if Bournemouth makes a super deal by losing a defender who is said to be the new Marquinhos, and he will be maybe a first choice for Paris Saint-Germain this season. So on the market, you might have lost a 3-star one and to buy a 2-star one. So I am curious to see what Zaberski means for Paris Saint-Germain and what Bournemouth will get in exchange.
Listen, thank you very, very much indeed. Eric Bilderman there, all latest from France. We've got loads to get through in the next 2 hours, including some fantastic guests for you. Stay with us here. You'll listen to Danny Kelly and Daniele Fisichella on Trans-Europe Express.
The Lions. Real-life fantasy rugby, bitter rivalries set aside in a quest to create the world's best team in weeks. There's nothing like it, but who on earth had the idea and how did it all begin? Incredibly, the first Lions tour was organised and funded by three men who played in England's first ever Test cricket match: opening bowler Alfred Shaw, opening batsman Arthur Shrewsbury and captain James Lillywhite. The 1888 Lions squad, then made up of 17 English, 4 Scots and 1 Welshman and a Northern Irishman, took a 46-day boat trip to New Zealand before heading to Australia. The Lions weren't alone on the boat. Also on board were 300 stoats and weasels who were brought over to eliminate New Zealand's rabbit problem. The first ever Lions captain, Robert Seddon, died of drowning midway through the tour while sculling on a river. Andrew Stoddart, who was another of the cricketers there, took over and was the star of the tour. The next one was the first to get official recognition from the RFU against the newly formed Springboks. Although the Lions won the series and beat the Boks again 5 years later, in the 12 series since in South Africa, they've only won 2. New Zealand has proved an even tougher hunting ground, just the 1 series win for the Lions in 11 attempts, which came in 1971. And then there was that nail-shredding drawn series in 2017, only the second in Lions history. Only once have the Lions clinched a series after losing the first test, 1989, when David Campese's infamous ghost pass was pounced upon by Ian Evans. Before World War II, the Lions had a dark blue strip, which on the 1930 tour forced the All Blacks to play in all white. So in 1950, the iconic red shirts, white shorts and blue and green socks combination was born. It remains the symbol of the greatest alliance of adversaries in all of sport. To borrow the phrase from Jim Telfer, the Lions is Everest.
Yeah, welcome back everybody to the second hour of 3 of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express with me, Danny Kelly, and him, Daniele Fisichella. Isn't he great? We've got lots and lots of guests for you in this second hour. Among the things we'll be talking about are we're going to lean into Daniele's Italianness. You might have guessed from his accent, he's Italian, you know. We're going to talk about the title race over 2 sections of the programme. Here, but then we'll be joined by Jonathan Wilson, the great Jonathan Wilson, whose various books about football are becoming the standard by which others are judged. He's got a new history of the World Cup coming out in time for the tournament in 11 months' time. And we'll be paying tribute to Jorge Costa, the captain of Porto's Champions League winning team not so very, very long ago, and a great player in his own way. Maybe not the greatest player, but a great leader of men. Who has passed away recently. Welcome one, welcome all to Trans Europe Express. So Daniele, let's turn to Italy then, because I know you've got plenty to say. And I think we should help people by reminding people that compared to even England, certainly to Spain, certainly to France, and mostly to Germany, Italy's a very competitive league these days, because after 9 years of total domination by Juventus, since then we've had 5 years with 5 different winners, none of them Juventus.
And no winner has retained the title, which makes it extraordinary. Napoli has won 2, Inter has won 2, Milan has won 1, and Juventus, you're right, they were nowhere to be seen, struggling almost to make it to the 4th place. So it's all changed very, very quickly.
Stop laughing, Daniele. Don't laugh at Juventus. That's not fair.
No, I'm sure they will be back soon, certainly in my lifetime. But yes. it goes to show that Italian football has changed, has developed, has evolved. And also, it is a competitive league. It's a league where, of course, the money and the riches are no longer the ones of the past. So clubs, managers have to become more inventive, and the innovation, the inventiveness has paid out through these years, to the last 5 years. And I think more changes and more revolutions are coming this season, with 12 out of 20 teams changing the managers. So it goes to show, when you haven't
Talk
got
about that
enough,
later, 'cause that's amazing.
which is a lot. It's incredible. Yeah. At the top, at the bottom, newly promoted sides, pretty much everyone. It goes to show that when there are not so much money around, it's the managers, it's the man at the helm who makes the difference. So that's why the club are investing.
Well, actually, what it shows, I think you could equally argue, is that when you haven't got that much money, you can't change the personnel the way you want. So you try and change the manager and their relationship to the personnel and get more out of the players you have. We should start with one club who doesn't seem to have any trouble with money. Champions last year, I think to most people were surprised. Champions last year, despite selling their best player in Kvaratskhelia, amazing. Napoli, under my old friend Antonio Conte, who I have to salute, because much as I despised what he was trying to do at Spurs, it was an amazing season for Napoli. But they've really gone again. Give us the list of the players they brought in, because they've decided to, I wish it was the old days and I could talk about, they decided to spend billions of lira, but they spent a lot of euros in the past 6 weeks, haven't they?
Almost 100 millions, and probably they're not done yet. So let's start in order. A new goalkeeper, Vanja Milinkovic-Savic, who's a starter for Serbia, used to play for Torino. Very solid goalkeeper, probably is going to replace Meret. Then a couple of defenders, Sam Bukema from Bologna, Champions League experience, 30 millions, by the way. Luca Marianucci, younger, from Empoli, 9 millions. And then the exciting ones, Noah Lang from PSV, the winger, 25 million euros, who basically won PSV the league and knocked out Juventus last season out of the Champions League. So again, is a project, okay? He will see how he fit into Italy, but is exciting for sure. Up front, Lorenzo Lucca from Udinese, tall striker, used to play for Ajax, now went for Udinese, a great replacement for Lukaku, proven and tested in Serie A. And then the jewel of the crown, which they didn't spend any money for, is Kevin De Bruyne, who's probably going to take Serie A by a storm. Yesterday scored 2 goals against Girona in a friendly, gave an assist. It all depends how fit he will be. It all depends how many games he will play. I'm not expecting Kevin De Bruyne to play every single week. He'll probably rest against Pisa and play against AC Milan and Inter Milan, just to give you an idea. But I think with these additions, and perhaps more to come, Napoli are still needing to sign in a winger, probably Chiesa, someone else, a defender, Gutierrez from Girona, another midfielder. So with these additions, really Napoli look like they have 2 squads and can balance, of course, the demands of European football, which they didn't have last season.
Well, that was my next question to you, because that, to me, having watched Antonio Conte work close up when he was in London, the work rate demanded, and of course this is true of many clubs, but Antonio Conte, the work rate demanded of Napoli's players, they were very lucky that they didn't have the Champions League last year or European football to distract them. What is your guess, your hunch? It can only be a guess. How will they deal with having to play a Champions League game on Tuesday or Wednesday and then back into Serie A Saturday, Sunday?
He will use the turnover, as he's always done every time he was at a big club, Antonio Conte, sometimes more successfully than other times. But it's true that the record of Antonio Conte in the Champions League, it is pretty poor. He often put it down to the fact that he didn't have the squad to compete, but certainly this excuse wouldn't work out this time, because Napoli have really strengthened when they were in a situation of power. I think it will be all about the adaptability of Antonio Conte. Last season, he was extremely good at changing the system halfway through, starting with a back 3, going back to a back 4, when he understood he needed to build the team around a solid defense. But we know in Europe, you need to be proactive, you need to attack, you need to press high, you need to command the play, not just playing reactively. Otherwise, eventually,
saw exactly the same in the Club World Cup. You've got to be on the front foot at that level now, haven't you?
You have to do it. So probably we'll see two faces of Napoli, perhaps more Conte style, more reactive in Serie A, not necessarily trying to dominate games as they didn't most of the time last season, but maybe with these new signings and with players of the experience of De Bruyne and others, trying to play more on the front foot in Europe, where, of course, they have no pressure in terms, nobody expects them perhaps to reach the final, as Inter did last season. But, of course, 8 games in the Champions League can bring a lot of revenues. And that's where Napoli, whose finances, by the way, are excellent, because not only they buy well, but they sell really, really well. The sale of Osimhen is a bit of a miracle, really, or a masterpiece, if you like. Was getting 70 million for a player that's been loaned out twice in the last 2 seasons, I think is really, really good. So obviously, having the opportunity to advance in the Champions League will be paramount, will be key, or winning as many games as possible, because it will guarantee the stability of the team for years to come.
I'm really fascinated by what's going on at Internazionale. A new manager in Christian Chivu, who's hardly managed at this level before, plus a saga involving Ademola Lookman. They want him from Atalanta. He wants to go from Atalanta, but they haven't made a bid that Atalanta find acceptable. First of all, talk to us about Chivu and what he might do. Will he change the system much?
Chivu will try to change the system based on the back 3 of Inzaghi, because of course the personnel is the same, Bastoni, Acerbi and Pavard, so he cannot really switch it to a back 4, but he wants an Inter that is less rigid and is an Inter that is able to play more in transitions and perhaps to try to unlock defenses through players that can take people's on, that can dribble. Inter have been extremely organized in the last few years and have shown some of the best football in Italy through intricate maneuvers, but they never had a great dribbler. And that's where the idea of Ademola Lookman comes in. Someone different who can start on the left-hand side, drifting in, taking people on, has got assists, has got goals, of course, but can really change the pace of games quite quickly. And that's what Inter needs, because the Achilles heel last season was that they were far too predictable at times, especially in Italy, and when the form of some of the key players like the wing backs, perhaps Di Marco, who didn't have a great season as well, and some of the midfielders, namely Çalhanoğlu and Mkhitaryan, the form of those players dipped. Really, they found themselves out of answers. So a change of system for Inter, an Inter that is less rigid, more direct, and can have more plans within the same game, which probably was something that under Simone Inzaghi they did not have. But it's not going to be easy for Inter to rebuild with a young squad. They've made signings all under 23 years old, but of course with a new manager who's going to feel much, much more pressure compared to the previous job that he had at Parma, where he did a good job, by the way, saving them from relegation. But of course, stepping into Inter, the team where he played as a player, is quite something.
Presumably, Lookman has now caused such the downfall of the relationship between Lookman and Atalanta means that Ademola will end up at Inter, yeah?
Well, it looks like, because the player wants to go at Inter and he has an agreement in principle with Inter to join them. Of course, Atalanta like to sell at their own price, which is around 50 million euros. Inter are offering around 45, 44. I think in the end the deal is going to be done, but the player has gone missing for the last 3-4 days. He hasn't gone in training. He's been reported to be in Portugal in a resort training on his own. So it's been really a situation where probably the player comes out the worst, because, you know, Lookman has been a very important player for Atalanta. He scored 3 goals in the Europa League final, but Atalanta also been really good for him because his career was almost going down a blind alley, and they actually trusted him. So to end on this way, it doesn't look extremely professional from his point of view. Inter probably are quite happy just to wait until the very end of the transfer market, knowing the Nigerian wants to join them. But of course, the quicker the better for Chivu, so he can have his starman for his attack. That, you know, an attack with Lautaro, Thuram and Lookman look quite potent, really, especially in Italy.
Okay, listen, we'll have a quick break. When we come back, I want to continue to pick your brains about Italian football and what we might expect to see in the new season, including an all-new look Milan midfield, where they'll be relying, it seems, for the big games on a 40-year-old Luka Modric. That's next here on Trans-Europe Express. You're listening to Trans-Europe Express with me, Danny Kelly, and the other Danny, Daniele Fisichella. We're talking about Italy. You said something there in passing, but I've kind of gripped onto it now, Daniele, because it seems extraordinary to me that in a league, in the top leagues, it's thought that stability is a good thing. Overall, stability is a good thing. And yet, going into the new season in Italy, 20 teams in Serie A, 12 of them with new managers. I mean, that is extraordinary. If nothing else, that's an extraordinary number. And it means that it's almost impossible to work out who will finish first to 20th because you don't know. All these managerial appointments are a gamble.
Some of them are returns as well. If you look at Max Allegri, for example, returning to Milan, a team that is managed almost 12 years ago. Stefano Pioli returning to Fiorentina as well. Ultimately, among the top teams, only the champions, Napoli, had kept the same manager, Antonio Conte, who, by the way, was looking to leave the club only after winning the Scudetto because he perhaps didn't feel the challenge, and then he was convinced by De Laurentiis that he should have stayed because he would have managed a bigger and stronger squad. But it goes back to the point we were discussing earlier. I think it's about, in Italy, the school of managers is still very, very strong. And the managers of today are the players of the golden era. So they are the players who were playing in the 90s, in the late 80s, when Italian football was at the peak. And I think that has helped forming new generations of managers, which have, of course, learned from the best as well, the winning mentality.
I should make the point to people listening to our voices, that golden era of Italian football, we'll be focusing on that at 11:15 when John Blair has written a new book about the personalities, the cults, the characters, and the kits in particular, which dominated British television screens in that golden era. John will be coming on to talk us at 11:15. You don't miss that, everybody.
Absolutely.
It's going to be good fun. Yeah.
No, so yeah, that it all goes back to that. But ultimately, players win you games, of course, more than managers. And in Italy, we haven't been able to sign the best players. Actually, we have sold most of our best players abroad. But the school of managers is what has kept us going, both Italians and foreigners as well. So that's why so many managerial changes, because if the players don't work out, get someone else new who can implement a new plan.
Well, you know, perhaps it's to do with my age, Daniele, but I have every faith in Italian professional footballers because I think the culture in the country is still so strong, and their players. And I say this, of course, but all the evidence of my own eyes, they can't qualify for a World Cup and all the rest of it. You know, but they had Italian footballers seem to me to be everything you want from professional footballers by and large. But you also said, while we're preparing for this program, and I think this is very profound, there is a real sea change now happening with those coaches, many of whom, as you say, have been at the top of the Italian game in one capacity or another, players, coaches, managers, for 30 years. Every team in Italy, you think, every important team will play three up front, which hasn't been the case until recently.
It looks like Italy is following the lead from some of the best European teams from last season, from Barcelona to PSG, Manchester City, Real Madrid, and it is really to go with three at the front. So a centre forward and two attacking wingers, not fullbacks converted into wingers. We have been in Italy living the last 3 or 4 years with most of the top teams, namely Inter, but also some other of Conte's teams playing with a 3-5-2, which was a 5-3-2 masked, really. Of course, these are only numbers. Then it depends how he's applied on the pitch. But now it looks different. So you look at Napoli, Lukaku, Noah Lang, Neres, Inter, we mentioned before as well, but also the likes of Milan with the centre forward they still have to sign, probably Højlund, Rafa Leao, Pulisic, Juventus with Ildiz, Kolo Muani, and another winger. Because I think Italian teams have learned the lesson from the Champions League, from the Champions League final, from the Club World Cup. And it's really, you need to go for it. You need to attack. You need to press high. That's the direction the football is taking. Leaving too much space or too much time for the opposition to build, it's ultimately going to cost you. And that's what cost Inter, for example, the final in the Champions League, and they were not able to react to the press. So it is a step forward. It is an evolution. I would expect at least 7 or 8 of the top 7-8 teams really to play with a front three, or at least to start with a front three. And that will be interesting to see if they keep the same approach also in Europe, because clearly this is what is paying off at the moment.
Okay, and let's talk about Milan then, because always a fascinating team. And you mentioned they'll probably have Rasmus Højlund in front of Rafael. Either side will be Pulisic and Rafael Leao. But the big change there is they have, a bit like Manchester United changing their entire forward line, Milan are attempting to change their entire midfield.
Yes, and they signed finally the big target, which was Yashari, Ardon Yashari from Bruges. After a long negotiation, almost 2 months, they signed the midfielder, who is a midfielder that has really impressed last season in the Champions League, can do both phases defensively, but also keep the ball really well. He played against Leeds a couple of days ago and played well. But most importantly, they have signed Luka Modric as a free transfer, 41 years old, and is the marquee signing of Milan. Now, some people, might think, okay, why are Milan signing a 41 years old? They need the experience, of course, in midfield, but they also think with this new younger midfield with Yashari, with Samuele Ricci signed from Torino, also very dynamics, and the help of existing other players from Fofana, which they signed last season, Loftus-Cheek coming back from an injury, they could sustain a player like Modric that is not as mobile as he used to be, but if the ball is in Milan's feet, of course, he guarantees you to control the game. Now, all of this is in theory, because on the bench sits Max Allegri, who is the manager renowned for being more reactive than proactive. However, Allegri has been out of the game for the last couple of seasons, and of course, being a great also knowledgeable of the game, he will have adapted and would have changed and would have brought something else. He has made it very clear that he wants to build Milan from a defensive perspective, but that doesn't mean just sit back and let the other teams attack you. Otherwise, as I said, probably Modric will not have no reason to exist in his starting lineup. But yeah, I think Milan could have a great opportunity this season to do what Napoli did last season. They won't play in Europe. They will be fresher, so hence having somebody like Modric in your team makes sense. Less games to play, less games for the legs of Modric. And again, this new midfield looks really, really competitive with goals as well, with a lot of energy, and could be the backbone of Milan and could give the opportunity to Leao and Pulisic to be freed from defensive duties, from tracking back, and feed the balls into center forward, which again remains a question mark. Could be Højlund, could be Vlahovic, but Milan looking good, looking strengthened at the moment.
Okay, well, my question would be, what happens if they play against a team who suddenly have a lot of possession? Much as I love Luka Modric, of course I do. I'm a Spurs fan. I love him to the soles of my feet. What happens, with all due respect, even if you're the miracle that is a 41-year-old Modric, what happens if you've got a minority of the ball? Now, listen, lots of our listeners here on talkSPORT support Newcastle United. They'll be very keen to know what kind of player Newcastle are getting from AC Milan, because they've signed for 35 million pounds, euros. I can't make out which one exactly it is. The defender Malik Thiaw. What kind of a player is he?
They get a quick, physically strong defender, quite versatile, can play also a right back, but also a player that in the last 2 seasons since he joined AC Milan hasn't really improved. I think he's remained the same kind of player with just a little bit more experience also in Europe. Milan signed him from Werder Bremen for 8 million. So obviously for Milan, this looks like a very good piece of business. Malik Thiaw has not been extremely consistent, also prone to mistakes, quite faulty. I do remember too many yellow cards, a few red cards also in some important games. The opinion among the Milan fans is this is a good business, almost a 32 million gain, which cover almost half of the lack of the Champions League funds they won't receive this season. So almost a deal that was too good to turn down. And actually, Milan have already signed a replacement. This very evening, Conny De Winter, the young defender from Genoa, again, another pacey defender, but more of a young prospect for them, for 20 million, half of the fee they got for Malik Thiaw. So I think for Newcastle United, probably not quite the player that will automatically slot into the starting 11.
De Winter sounds like, from what I've seen of him, which is not everything, a real bargain at 20, let's be honest. Insofar as any footballer is a bargain at 20 million euros. So I threw Terry Gibson under the bus earlier on. It's your turn now. Here it comes. You won't be able to hear it because it's electric bus now, because I'm very, very keen on sustainability. But it's coming towards you at high speed. Who's going to be the champions in Italy this season?
I think probably the great, and we haven't mentioned in them, but it could be Juventus here. Ooh. If they do manage to sign a midfielder, a strong midfielder that can be a playmaker for them. Maybe the likes of Kasper Jumland, for example, the Danish international.
Yeah, I think he'll be an expensive item, though, won't he? He will be. Portuguese teams don't give their players away, do they?
But they do need him. I think that's where they are short. And given that the deal for Colomwani is almost done and dusted, so they'll keep him. with the likes of Ildiz up front and Chico Conceição as well. And I think with a team that has shown at the end of the season and also through the Club World Cup at some degree that they still got the hunger, the desire, I think Juventus could be for a good contender. Let's not forget last season they conceded many goals at the end, but also because the best defender Bremer has been injured most of the season, and I think they never recover from that. A big task for Tudor as well. Again, as I said, it is a league that has had no owner almost for the last 5 seasons. So to keep in with the narrative, I would go and say Juventus because they haven't won it for a long time. But I think it's going to be extremely competitive. It's unlikely the Italian teams will repeat the feats they had done in Europe recently. Even Inter, I think, probably will focus more on the league, therefore making the league much more competitive. But I think the old lady could be back sooner or later.
Well, it's their turn almost in Italian football, which is an amazing thought, isn't it? It's their turn. Thank you, Daniele. Yes. Next up, I'm really looking forward to this. Jonathan Wilson, who has written some of the best books about football of the last 20 years, has now written a book that's called The New History of the World Cup, The Power and the Glory. He joins us next to tell us who, why, what, where and when on Trans Europe Express. Yeah, as you're no doubt tired of me saying, we're only, 11 months now away from the start of the World Cup in the United States, Mexico and Canada. My next guest has written a new book. It's called The New History of the World Cup. The Power and the Glory is the actual title of the book. I'm delighted to say we're joined by one of the great writers about football in modern times, Jonathan Wilson. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, how are you doing?
Really, really good and great. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan. I've been a huge fan of your work over the years. I mean, inverting the pyramid is, to me, I think it should be compulsory in the schools, to be absolutely honest. Listen, the history of the World Cup, it's well covered online these days. Brian Glanville's every 4 years updated volume has become almost a standard work itself. Why did you decide to write this book, and what could you bring, do you think, to the history of the great tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian Glanville's book is the great history of the World Cup. But if you read it now, it's very much focused on the matches, the goals,
yes,
who scored. There's not a huge amount about the socioeconomic, political, cultural background. So that was something I felt I could fill in. Also, when Brian was writing that book, I mean, I think the first edition that came out in the 80s, and he kept updating it. It was an era before the internet. It was much harder to do research. And we now are in the incredibly privileged position that a lot of countries, for instance, have digitized the newspapers. So you can pay a small subscription and you can get pretty much every newspaper that's ever been printed in Argentina or in Hungary,
amazing,
or Brazil,
isn't it?
or wherever.
Amazing.
And then you've got Google Translate. So even if you only have a slight grasp of the language, we're just using a phone, holding it over the screen, you can translate it. It's much easier to get in touch with experts in these countries. So, a lot of what Brian was doing, Brian's book is a great book, but there were limits on what he could do at the time.
Sure.
And I think one of the reasons nobody's really attempted to write another history of the World Cup is that Brian's book is so good. But I think if you look at it over the last decade, you start to think, I wonder if he could have gone into that a bit more. If we were doing this now, perhaps you'd have looked at this or that. You're checking details, checking dates, just getting a little bit some more information on things. All of that is much more possible now. So I think you can't really compare the two. It's writing in a different age.
I'm sorry, I've set you off here on a defence. I didn't mean for that to happen, Jonathan. I was just mentioning there was one great book, and now your books. I knew full well that it would be more attempting to fit the cultural, social and economic circumstances surrounding each tournament, as well as, of course, celebrating the football. And I'm sure, because I'm going to be honest with you here, I've not had a chance to read the whole thing yet. I'm sure it's exactly what it does. And for me, that's part of the excitement as each World Cup rolls around. Sometimes when it's in places that I don't approve of politically, I'm sort of biting my lip and all the rest of it. We were talking before the show started, Jonathan, about the World Cup the last times in the United States. I never tire of telling Daniele Fisichella that I was in the stadium when the Republic of Ireland beat Italy. I suspect there's less chance of that happening this time because the Republic won't qualify. But the world has changed so hugely, and at the moment the United States is changing very, very rapidly. What are you expecting the next World Cup to be like? Because it's only months away now.
Yeah, I'm not sure Italy will qualify. Never mind Ireland.
No,
so they both could be at home.
Daniele, don't listen to him, man. Don't listen to him.
Yeah, but I mean, it's that's obviously a huge factor. Is what is the America? I mean, I know Mexico and Canada have games, but they only have 12 games each. The bulk of the tournament is in the US. What is the US going to be? And I think the world, or the football world, went to the US in '94 thinking, well, this is a country that doesn't really get football. And actually, the crowds were the highest average attendance we've ever had at a World Cup, in terms of getting people into the stadiums, in terms of generating revenue. Arguably, the most successful World Cup there's been. That's not the only thing you should judge a World Cup on, but I think a tournament that a lot of people remember very clearly, very vividly. The extraordinary opening ceremony, Diana Ross missing that from 3 yards on the same day of the O.J. Simpson car chase through LA. Sort of just all of America on one day. But what is that going to look like next summer? And I think what is really interesting, doing this book, you realise every World Cup host has ever been has used it for political ends. We talked a lot in Qatar. We talked in Russia in 2018. Every host has. England did it in '66. Uruguay did it in 1930. What that projection is and the reasons why they're doing it, those are different. But what every single host up until now has had, they want to welcome the world. So in Mussolini's Italy in 1934, travel was subsidised to try and encourage fans to come and see.
Wow. Look
at Italy, isn't it amazing? Uruguay 1930 was subsidised as well, less successfully, because it's just so far from Europe. One of the things you find in 34, it's where sort of merchandising begins, certainly in football. They want people to buy souvenirs of incredible Italian craftsmanship. Russia in 2018 was incredibly welcoming. People, the Russian state, the Russian people wanted foreigners, wanted visitors to think Russia was a great place. Qatar also wanted to do that. For all the problems with Qatar, when you were there, I mean, maybe not if you were gay or Jewish, but fundamentally they wanted people to have a good time. And you look at what's happening in the US now, and there's such a hostility to foreigners. You look at immigration procedures, you look at how ICE is behaving. Is there that same welcome? And I think for the first time ever at a World Cup, maybe there won't be. Now, I understand the average American, most Americans will be as welcoming as they always have been. But the state, I think, suddenly has a hostility, which is really unusual.
And paradoxically, John, in such a divided world and such a conflicted world that we're seeing, and with America being divided within itself, this was going to be a tournament with more teams and more games as well, which probably clashes with what we would expect, or maybe what we experienced in the previous tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, you have a very obvious contrast that in 2017, before the Russia World Cup, you had Gianni Infantino, as the newly installed president of FIFA, saying to Putin, if you do not give visas to ticket holders, there will be no World Cup in Russia. And you look at the situation now and you have Iranians are banned. So the players themselves, they have qualified. The players, they will have dispensation. The majority of the backroom team will have dispensation, but possibly not all the backroom team. If you're an Iranian fan, how can you go? You can't go. You're literally banned from going. And that's a very explicit, clear ban. There's also issues that visa processing takes an incredibly long time. So if you're, say, a Colombian, the average visa processing time now for a Colombian is longer than from now till the start of the World Cup. So you had to apply 3 or 4 months ago, but of course you wouldn't have a match ticket. So how will you get the visa? It's a catch-22. So this is a huge problem. And again, this is this point about the hostility to the outside. We've never seen anything like this at a World Cup before.
Jonathan, on a more cheery note, if I may, I have a theory that you can always judge the exact age of a football fan by which is their favourite World Cup. I'll give the example, and of course it's the one when you're the nearest to your 14th birthday. So for me, an old geezer, it's Mexico '70, where we saw colour television pictures for the first time of a World Cup, where we saw a World Cup played in extraordinary sunshine, where we saw that Brazil's shirts really are the yellow of gold, and we saw that amazing team. So a matter of interest, what's your favourite World Cup, having done all and I'm sure you've had the same experience with all the people you've talked to. There's something about the moment when the World Cup catches your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I was just really precocious, but I think my favourite was '82, and I was only 5. But I know 1990 would be when I was 14.
Wilson, you're some kind of genius. Some kind of genius.
I think I remember really clearly running home from school to watching them beat France. When Brian Robson scored the goal after 17 seconds, and it was. I mean, what you're describing from Mexico, and I know. Yeah, that was the first tournament ever to be broadcast by satellite. It was the first time that there was sort of global transmission. The fact that it was in colour as well. It's almost impossible from this point of view to understand the impact that had. But me as a 5-year-old growing up in Sunderland, watching that World Cup in Spain, the language of the captions on the TV was different. Yeah, suddenly, I mean, I remember being at my grand's watching Peru v Cameroon, and my auntie Doris saying, "Why is this on TV? It's not a British team." It's like, yes, but it's Peru against Cameroon, and sort of giving my auntie Doris a sort of lecture on why Peru v Cameroon was a sort of really important football match. And it's learning sort of about Zico and Socrates and Falcao and that great Brazil side. That game between Brazil and Italy, the 3-2, which I think, I watched it back. It's not as good a game as I remember it being, but somehow in my emotional heart, it's the greatest game ever played.
In the same way as the semi-final in Mexico 70 between Germany and Italy, to me, is the greatest game of football I've ever watched. It certainly wasn't replaced by the recent Europa League final. Let's be honest about that. Daniele, what's your favourite World Cup ever?
For me, it's France 1998 because of an anagraphical question. But also, I got a question for Jonathan very quickly. I think the beauty of the World Cup is to watch Cameroon, Peru. But do you think now that ability, that enjoyment of watching obscure nations, so of course obscure for us, that we are Europeans, is a bit lost, and perhaps next year will show once more with more teams?
I think there's a big danger with the dilution of quality. I think there's two issues going on there. One is the thing is just going to go on forever. It's going to be near enough 6 weeks. And we've seen with Cricket World Cups that, I'm speaking of somebody who loves cricket almost as much as I love football. There have been Cricket World Cups that have just gone on too long. It's just, hang on, what?
Couldn't agree
more,
What
is this
Jonathan.
game? Does this matter? So I think that is a danger. I think this is also going to be the first World Cup ever where it's almost going to be impossible to watch every game. Previously, I reckon I watched 90% of the games. Obviously, for some games happen at the same time. But fundamentally, you try and watch everything. And when you're in the country covering it, sometimes you're travelling, you can't do that. This World Cup, 4 games a day, is going to be almost impossible. But the point about Cameroon and Peru in 1982 was they had qualified through incredibly rigorous and difficult qualifying processes. You look at this time, and if you've got... in the South American group, I think, had a spell of being perfect when 10 teams, they all play each other, which has been brilliant for the development of, say, Venezuelan football, Bolivian football. Mm-hmm. They're getting regular games against the best nations. It's generated a lot of revenue. I think that's been a great thing generally for South America. And it was 4 qualified plus 1 in the playoff, or 5 qualified and 1 in the playoff. Now, I think it's 6 and 1 in the playoff. So it's really hard not to qualify from South America, which means you're going to get some very average South American teams.
You almost have to belt Gianni Infantino in the puss not to qualify from South America now. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're looking at... I mean, I go to the African Cup of Nations. I've been to 11. I'll be going to my 12th in Morocco this winter. I love African football. I know quite a lot about African football. By the time you're getting down to the 8th best team, it's not going to be that high a level. So I do worry that there will be some really poor games, but I guess I'll feel less guilt about missing them because there are so many matches this time around. But I do feel, I think the structure's not good either. I think there's a beauty about a 14 group with 2 qualifying because it means every game matters, but you can make a mess of your first game and you can still get through. When in 2/3 of the groups, the best third place team is also qualifying, it just takes away a lot of that jeopardy. You're going to have a lot of teams going to their third game knowing they've already qualified.
And uniquely, I think, Jonathan, it just isn't as easy to follow for the people like myself who are not 5-year-old geniuses. Listen, Jonathan, I'm sorry to cut you short. I could listen to you all day. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me just tell you again, the book is called The Power and the Glory. It's got a lovely cover, by the way, A New History of the World Cup. And I apologise again for not having read the thing, but believe me, sometime in the next 10 days, I will be devouring it from cover to cover. You should have a look at it too. Jonathan Wilson there here on Trans Europe Express, where next we'll be paying tribute to Jorge Costa, Porto's captain when they won the Champions League, who was passed away far too early. Yeah, some sad news over the past few days when we learned that Jorge Costa, most famously associated with Porto Football Club, and of course, winner of many caps for Portugal, had died much too young. He was just 53 years of age. And Daniele, I think it's worth spending a few minutes talking about Jorge, because there is a danger that you could say he was the archetypical big, strong centre half, and it was all about being a bit of a bull when the game was played like that. But there was much more to him as a man and as a player and as a leader than that.
Otherwise, he would not have played 383 games with Porto, winner of a UEFA Cup, a Champions League, an Intercontinental Cup, and also more than 50 appearances with Portugal. He was an old school centre back, but he was extraordinarily good at reading the game, and a very important leader, extremely confident in his ability. As we said, a winner, but a winner not only in the later stages of his career under Jose Mourinho, of course, the Porto that won the Champions League in 2004 against Monaco, but also since he was young, because in 1991, young Jorge Costa won the Under-20 World Cup, and he was the stalwart behind the generation of phenomenons, Figo, Rui Costa, João Pinto, almost the bodyguard of the talent that Portugal had up front. Jorge Costa was the symbol of Porto, a team that he had to leave in 2002 after having some issues with the then managers José Machado, but then rejoined one season after playing in England for Charlton under Alan Kirbishley. He joined again under José Mourinho. José Mourinho himself, who cried last week when he was remembering his great captain during his press conference.
Mourinho made a beautiful quote translated into English about Jorge Costa's influence in the dressing room, which led to that great Porto team winning first, as you say, the UEFA Cup and then the Champions League. The greatest achievement of Mourinho's career, I don't care what anyone says, but he says, Jorge sorted out the garbage for me so I could do the coaching, meaning that if there were issues with other teammates or personnel or griping, Jorge Costa sorted it out so that they could get on with the important work of building that wonderful team.
Yes, and he, as we mentioned, he was the sheriff of the defense in the early 90s, late 90s. Jorge Costa was ruling with his own rules in the boxes, around Europe. And of course, somebody of that stature, physical stature, whose nickname was Obicho, the animal or the tank. You could not expect him to play the finest arts of football. Of course, his football was very much physical, was very vocal as well. But the leadership skills cannot be underestimated of a former player that then went on to become a good manager, a successful manager. He managed over 17 clubs in his career, starting with Braga, and then even including the Gabon national team. And the last appointment was as a general director of Porto, the team obviously where he linked most of his career, but tributes have been paid to him across Europe, UEFA itself, of course, remembering one of the greatest figures, perhaps less successful than what he could have been, but that's a little bit maybe the story of Portugal as a national team across the 90s, full of talents and not perhaps full of victories. But Jorge Costa certainly one of those that hardly will be forgotten.
I wonder what Charlton fans remember of that season he had at the Valley. And before we say he's probably the greatest player ever to play for Charlton Athletic, I can hear voices going, "What about Alan Simonson?" European Footballer of the Year, ended up playing for Charlton. Such are the intricacies and the vagaries of the professional game. But we do pay proper tribute to, as I say, the captain of a team. Imagine Porto winning the Champions League now. But he, Jorge Costa and Mourinho and Maniche and all the rest of them, that's what they did. And it was extraordinary. and it's very sad to see him go. Still got an hour to go here on Trans-Europe Express, where we'll be talking to Tim Vickery, now back after his sojourn in Europe, back in his South American eyrie, among other things. We'll also be getting you through the Champions League qualifiers. We've got another author joining us to talk about the golden age of Italian football, much else besides. Also, last 15 minutes, your questions, please. If you've got questions for Daniele about transfers or anything to do with European football, send them to us now at talkSPORT on Twitter or at Danny Kelly Words, or find Daniele himself on Twitter. Send your questions. We'll try and answer the best 5 or 6 of them in that last 15 minutes. You're listening to Trans-Europe Express.
Formula One. It's a sport often seen as insular and elitist, but it's seen a meteoric rise under its owners Liberty Media, not only in popularity and viewership, but in the ability to almost print money. From greater access to more races, here's how it happened. For decades, Formula One was owned and run by one man, Bernie Ecclestone. He was old school, someone who thought the sport itself was enough, and there was no need for all this modern marketing and social media nonsense. But in 2016, Ecclestone agreed to sell his baby to American group Liberty Media. It cost Liberty Media $4.4 billion, and they quickly got to work. We got an F1 app almost immediately, and teams were allowed to show us more from behind the scenes. One of Liberty's most important deals was with Netflix, which in 2019 brought us Drive to Survive. The effect? An almost 70% rise in viewership for races in the US alone. It's massively benefited Formula One online too, with a rise from 7.8 million followers across its social media platforms in 2016 to around 50 million today. New eyes are on the sport too, with F1's own subscription TV channel, which people can watch anywhere in the world. But the main market they've tapped into is the US. There's now 3 races there a year, in Texas, Miami and Las Vegas, and an American-branded team, Cadillac, getting involved in the sport too. More races seems to be the direction of travel. A street circuit in Madrid's being welcomed onto the calendar, while conversations around a Grand Prix in Africa have ramped up in the last few years. More big events could be in the offing too. after the massive F175 season launch event in London in 2025. 7.5 million people tuned in to watch it live across their social media channels, and that doesn't include the viewing figures for where it was broadcast on TV in certain countries. It seems Liberty will do whatever they can to grow the F1 brand. Their efforts have been worthwhile too, with Forbes valuing the sport at $17.1 billion back in 2023, almost 4 times more than what they bought it for in 2016. Not bad, considering it's seen as a sport where people just drive around in circles.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back all to the third and final hour of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. Hope you've been enjoying listening to it as much as we have doing it, in which case you've had a ball and a blast. I'm Danny Kelly. Daniele Fisichella is also with me. We've got loads of other voices you'll hear in this final hour, during which time, among other things, we'll be talking to author John Blair about his new book about the golden age of Italian football, particularly the kits and the characters. We'll talk you through the Champions League qualifiers, some very big names liable to fall out of the tournament before we get into the actual group stage. And as I say, we'll answer some of your questions. If you send them to us now on X/Twitter at Danny Kelly Words, at talkSPORT, or at Daniele Fisichella. When you look him up, he'll send it to him as well. My army of asymmetrically haired teenage minions will check out the best ones and put them to Daniele in the last 15 minutes of the show. You're listening to Trans Europe Express, and of course at 11 o'clock, normally it's time to talk to Tim Vickery. Last week we couldn't do it because he was in the air on his way back to South America, having made what can be described as a state visit to Britain and to talkSPORT, where he was received rapturously by one and all, his every footstep preceded by rose petals thrown into his stride. And he joins us now from South America. Hi, Tim.
Yeah, very good evening, one and all.
Hi, Tim. Was that your experience of your time in London? That rose petals thrown into your stride?
You're not Danny Kelly Words for nothing, are you? That's that was a perfect rendition of my London experience, taking the edge a little bit off the fact that you were having a heatwave until I turned up, and then it turned decidedly mediocre, and now I've gone back. You're going to have another heatwave. While there's a nip in the air here. I was very jealous of watching the Community Shield today and seeing how they stopped for drinks breaks.
Well, here in the Kilkenny Hills, I'm promised tomorrow. The weather forecast on the 11th of August will be dense fog. And now, we are a sort of fog catchment area, I think it's fair to say. There was a lot this afternoon as well. We're high up. And in a wet country, so you're going to get fog. But tomorrow, I suspect it's going to be spectacular. I will put some pictures up on social media of what it's like to live in certain parts of Southern Ireland in the middle of the summer. Tim, you've sent us your list of things you want to talk about, but I want to start with something else, and I hope I'm not throwing this to a curveball. I'm not. Of course I'm not. Darwin Núñez has gone to Al Hilal for something in approaching 55 million. Is there still a great player in there, or a £55 million player in there, or have Liverpool pulled off one of the great heists in world football history?
I'm very sad to see him go, actually, and I thought I had this one all worked out. Well, how about, all right, Liverpool want Isak. How about Isak comes to Liverpool and Darwin goes the other way with a little bit of cash, maybe. Darwin goes the other way. Because I think that the Newcastle fans would have absolutely loved him. They'd have really taken to a number 9 like that. He's always given it his all. He's erratic. I don't think he's going to get a great deal better, but he makes things happen. So I'm sad to see him leave. And when he is on a streak, he can be really, really hard to handle. So for me, this is a loss for the Premier League.
Tim, starting next week, the Libertadores and the Copa Sudamericana as well. Looking at the Libertadores, the round of 16, is it going to be all Brazil, Brazil, Brazil after the Argentinian team's poor showing at the Club World Cup? Who are the big hitters?
Yes. Well, Brazil has won the last 6 times. That's never happened before. And 4 of those 6 have been all Brazilian finals. And there's a little piece of information that I think sums up what South American football has become. In the group phase, one of the top goal scorers and one of the most impressive players is left-footed striker called Viveiros from Atlético Nacional of Colombia. Now, they have qualified. They won the thing in 2016. They've won the Libertadores twice. They're a big team, Atlético Nacional. And since winning in 2016, they've done very, very little. They're through to the second round. They face São Paulo of Brazil, the first leg, on Tuesday. And where is Mr. Viveiros playing his football? The left-footed striker who is so incisive for Atlético Nacional in the group phase of the Libertadores. Come the knockout phase of the Libertadores, he is making his living in the Brazilian second division with Atlético Paranaense. Yes, and that really tells you a lot about how Brazil is dominating, because not only are its clubs increasingly wealthier than the rest, they are now using this wealth to pick off the cherries from the neighbouring countries. So, yes, the Brazilian teams are the big hitters without any doubt about it. There's a little bit of pressure on 1 or 2 of them after falling a bit short of expectations, I think, in the Club World Cup. And Flamengo and Palmeiras, who over the last 5-6 years or so have been the best, both of them got knocked out of the Brazilian Cup in midweek. Now, that's a big deal. And that really puts the pressure on. Flamengo have an all-Brazilian tie against Internacional, who have been a big disappointment this year, but could raise their game. Palmeiras should be fine. They're up against a team from Peru called Universitario. It's the first team from Peru in nearly 15 years that made it out to the group stage. Botafogo, who also people will have seen from the Club World Cup, where, of course, they beat Paris Saint-Germain. They are the defending champions, and they are up against a team from Ecuador, Liga of Quito, or LDU of Quito. And that means altitude in the second leg. So Botafogo on Thursday, there'll be pressure on them, and they have sold their centre-forward, Igor Jesus, to Nottingham Forest. They brought in reinforcements. They won 5-0 away at the weekend, so morale is high. But the pressure's on them to do well in front of their own fans, because they won't want to defend a slender lead or no lead at all at the altitude of Quito a week later. So most of the big hitters are Brazilian. You look for the exceptions. Well, River Plate maybe of Argentina. They're against Libertad of Paraguay. Roque Santa Cruz, 43 years old and all. Racing of Argentina, although they've lost one of their best players to River Plate, they're up against the famous name Peñarol of Uruguay, who were the first winners and so strong in the early years. But Uruguay haven't won this competition since 1987. Once you get into the TV era, prior to the TV era, 60,000 in a stadium in Montevideo is the same as 60,000 in the stadium in Madrid. Once you get into the TV era, it doesn't work like that at all. Hence the fact that Uruguay, such a small country, such a small catchment area, have found it hard to compete since 87. Estudiantes of Argentina, Juan Sebastian Verón playing a big role there off the pitch. They're up against Cerro Porteño of Paraguay. They'll be favourites to go through. So the Brazilians aren't going to have it all their way, but I do fear that, again, once we get down to the business stage, it is going to be a very, very... of the last 16, we got 6 from Brazil, 4 from Argentina. So there's only really crumbs for the rest of the continent, isn't there?
Tim, I'll come back to you about the Ballon d'Or in a second. Let me just say, as you probably heard in the news from Hugh Chambray, the big and important golf tournament at the St. Jude at the beautifully named Southwind course in Memphis has gone to a playoff. JJ Spawn of the United States and Justin Rose, the veteran English player, are in the playoff. It's a sudden death playoff. They've just JJ Spawn has just driven at the first hole. Well, it'll be as many holes as it takes to get to a sudden death. I'll keep you across all of that, because that would be a huge win for either of those men. Tim, which takes us to the Ballon d'Or nominations, which is how we started Trans Europe Express tonight. Given the seemingly a tsunami of talent that pours out of South America every transfer window, are you surprised there are only 4 South Americans in the long list for the Ballon d'Or?
Well, it does really leap out, doesn't it? And of the 4, well, one is Vinny Jr., who surely had a better year the previous one.
He's not going to win it this year, is he? No.
No, he's not going to win it this year. One is Alexis McAllister. Do we see him as a potential winner? Very fine player, very good season with Liverpool.
Wrong kind of player, isn't he? Wrong kind of player.
I would have thought so, especially after Rodri. One is Rafinha, who had a wonderful season for Barcelona. But is he now second fiddle to Lamine Yamal at Barcelona? And the other is Lautaro Martinez, who leads the line so efficiently for Inter Milan. But do we see him? I don't really think we see any of them as winners. It is striking. I wonder what Julian Alvarez is thinking, looking at that list, thinking, well, maybe this time next year, maybe after the World Cup, we'll be looking at a different list. But I wonder, one conclusion that I take from this, and this is, I think, quite worrying for South American football, is that Europe has really learnt how to produce talent. But I wonder if you gentlemen have any conclusions or any thoughts on so few South Americans in this list of 30.
I think, Tim, you pressed on a bruise that I can't prove, but I think one of the reasons why South American players have, over the past 100 years, been so incredibly valued is their technical advance, their skill with the ball. We should talk about beach football and the Copacabana and all the rest of it. But the pickup games in South America meant the kids who went to football clubs aged 8, 9 and 10 were already tremendously good at controlling the ball. That now has changed in Europe, where the emphasis had been on running and tactics and all the rest of it. In our schools and in particular in these academies, the kids are coming out of those academies fantastic ball players. You've only got to look at the succession of ones that Manchester City and Chelsea are producing, but particularly Manchester City, kids who can play with the ball at a level that would have been unimaginable at 18 years of age back in the day, than when Europe preferred grunt and groan over technique and mastery of the football. And I think that's where the gap has closed, and why South Americans' teams may have fallen. Their luster is not quite the same because the gap has closed. That's my theory anyway.
There's an emblematic moment of this for me, which is Belgium knocking out Brazil in the 2018 World Cup. It was a terrific game, and I think Brazil deserved to be able to take that one into extra time. They didn't. They lost 2-1. But anyway, I think, especially talking to the then Brazil coach a couple of months later, and it's almost like the most stereotypical South American player on the field was Eden Hazard.
Of course it was Eden Hazard, yeah.
Low centre of gravity, can go either way, gave the Brazilian right back an absolute nightmares. So I think that bears out the point that Europe is now producing the kind of talent that it still buys from South America,
yes,
but now Europe is able to produce it itself.
Yeah, and I think the way the game was organised in the 80s and 90s in Europe, it did not value that kind of skill. Now we know that against teams who are phenomenally strong, phenomenally well organised, physically alert, the only thing that can break teams down usually is a piece of individual skill, which used to be the kind of the absolute thing you bought South American footballs for. And of course, the fact they like a row, and that continues to this day, which is good. Similar story, I think, in the women's Ballon d'Or, very few South Americans, and one of those is an absolute, albeit one of the world's greatest ever players, maybe the world's greatest ever women's player in Marta, but a veteran, you know.
Yeah, well, yes, although still very much alive. What she did last Saturday, just over a week ago, in the final of the Copa America. Brazil have won all the Copa Americas there have ever been in South America in the women's game, bar one. And they were just seconds away from being beaten by Colombia. Yeah. And she came up with this just outrageous shot in the 96th minute that took it to extra time. Looked like she'd won it in extra time with another goal that made it 4-3 for Brazil. Colombia had a wonderful equaliser from a free kick, and it went to penalties. And then with the fifth penalty, Marta had the chance to win it, and didn't take it and missed her penalty, so it carried on. But Brazil won in the end. But so she's in there in the list of 30 for the women's Ballon d'Or. But she's only got the company of one other South American. the only Brazilian-based player in that list of 30, the Palmeiras striker Amanda Gutierrez. So there's only two. None of the Colombians get named at all, and there's only 2 South Americans. And of that 30, the really striking thing for me is 5 play in the United States, 1 plays in Brazil, and 24 play in Europe. And I don't know if this is an exaggeration, but I think one thing we can clearly conclude, and the evidence was in front of all our eyes during the Euros over the past few weeks, it really is a testament to the speed with which the women's game has grown in Europe. And I look at the women's game in South America, and I see quite a lot of absolute progress. But in terms of relative progress, it just gets further and further behind Europe because what's happened in, Europe, games in Europe now, even the fact, not just England winning it, because obviously if you win, that's going to generate headlines. But the fact that the Wales fans travelled in numbers to an expensive destination when their side has no hope of winning the tournament whatsoever, that for me really shows the success of the event. And I look at the South America, the Copa America, lots of the games played in front of crowds of 300, and it just looks at it, and I think there's no way we can compete.
Tim, as always, a mixture of enjoyment and illumination. Thank you very, very much indeed. I'm glad you're safely home and back in Brazil now. Let me just tell you that in the playoff, in the St. Jude Classic, JJ Spawn of the United States is on the green in the it's a sudden death playoff in 2. Justin Rose drove to the ball within 2 inches of going out of bounds, which means he's now playing his second shot. He's finding it very difficult to do because his heels are overhanging the water. There is not enough room for him to play a conventional golf shot because the ball ended up so near the water. It's going to take an amazing effort from him to get this anywhere near. I don't think I should be commentating because I don't think talkSPORT have got the rights. But I'll let you know what happens after this quick break, after which, when we come back, we'll be talking to John Blair about his new book about Italian football. tell you that Justin Rose played a brilliant shot, nearly fell in the water. He literally had to do that thing where you windmill your arms backwards, stop himself falling in the water, but he put the ball, I would say, about 15 feet away from the hole. JJ Spawn has just had his putt on the 18th, and it rimmed at it touched the edge of the hole and sort of came out to about 2 feet away. It's still all there for Justin Rose if he can land this longish putt. Spawn is just playing out his fourth shot. That's in, which means Justin will have a putt to win the big tournament there, the St. Jude Classic, which is one of the richest tournaments outside of the majors in the United States. Now, John Blair was, in a previous life, a man who collected football kits. Now he's turned it into a publishing empire. Everybody should own a copy of his previous book, A Culture of Kits, the definitive guide to classic shirt collecting. I know I do. And now he's turned his attention to a particular group of shirts. His new book is called Football Kit Italia, Greatest Kits and Characters of the Golazzo Era. And I'm delighted to he joins us now. Hello, John.
Hey, Danny.
Listen, John, thank you. You've had to be a bit patient there because Tim Vickery went on and on and on about football. We know that you've been a person who started out, you've got a big collection, 500 plus shirts. You did a general book about it, which was shortlisted for the William Hill Sports Book of the Year. Congratulations on that. Why have you turned your attention particularly to Italian football between 1992 and 2002? And let me just say that the pictures of the kits on the cover, I'm literally, you can hear it, salivating. Why did you decide to do Italy next?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I mean, Serie A in the 1990s, it was just such a culturally important period in football, but also in UK British television broadcasting. Gazzetta launches on 1992 and on Channel 4. And for my generation, even 30 years later, there's just such love and nostalgia for that period, the players, the kits, and the TV show. And so as I was kind of thinking about a follow-up to A Culture of Kits, the goal was just really to write a book that celebrated that era, its impact on football, culture, TV. But I think to do it in a way that almost echoed that original show, very colorful, very visual, and what better way to tell it than through the kit journey.
John, since I moved to the UK almost 15 years ago, I realized how important has been Italian football, which I've lived in the first place when I lived in Italy, how important it has been for people of my age living in the UK. But according to you, was the most, I know there's been many, but was the most iconic kit through the 90s, through the golden era of Italian football? Or what is the one that people should really look forward to in your book?
Yeah, I mean, the one that gets a lot of attention is the Inter Milan third shirt, 97-98, the UEFA Cup winning shirt with R9. Hugely iconic. It's a third shirt. So it wasn't produced in huge quantities or numbers, and so there's a real demand for that kit if I had to pick one from the era.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a gem. I think also a kit that Inter brought back later on in some other shapes or form. But I think, with Ronaldo number 10, which again was a unicum because then he switched to number 9 the following season, because in 97-98 it was Ivan Zamorano who had the number 10. I think is really, really iconic. But for me, when I think about the kits of Italian clubs, it's interesting because they were made by brands that are no longer. If you think about Umbro, Asics, Rob Di Cappa, Fila, Lotto, and there are others that are more niche, but those are really special, John.
Yeah, and that was actually my favorite part of writing this book because, as you kind of rightly point out, I think in manufacturing back in the 90s, there's a real domestic bias in every league, and certainly in Italy that came through with Lotto, Diodora, Kappa, even smaller family businesses like ABM and Fila, and so it's not monopolized in the way it is now with the big players, and so it was really nice to go through that journey of the early 90s, and then you kind of get to the end of the 90s, early 2000s, and seeing the evolution of the designs as well as just the kind of aesthetic feel of them.
John, and also, I mean, I'm sure your book reflects this, it was an education for us all. That Parma's beautiful kit with Parmalat on the front of it, which I remember, it forced me, and this is before the internet, to go and try and find out what Parmalat was, because as far as I knew, it could be an insurance company or a company that made tractor tires, and it turned out to be a dairy foodstuff corporation. It really was extraordinary how important the kits were, because they were little gateways into a world. I mean, I know it sounds nuts now to kids, where you can just look these things up. You don't even have to press a button on your phone. Your voice can say, "Tell me about Parmalat." It's so different. Do you have a kit that you think was the worst kit that came up in your book?
Yeah, and maybe just to cover the first part. I think that's where the TV show was so enlightening, because in 1992, you've got to remember the context. I think the only foreign sport that was shown in Britain on television was the Olympics and the World Cup. And so suddenly you've now got this weekly gateway into ordinary life in Italy, the comings and goings, the style, and it was almost a hybrid viewing experience between.
It was amazing.
Wish You Were Here. It was incredible. And so that really kind of opened, I think, a lot of people's imagination to the different cultures out there, players, league, etc. Worst kit, I don't know. I mean, I don't really kind of go in for that type of thing. I think all kits have their own story and their own beauty. I think there's definitely nostalgia attached to all shirts. If you pushed me, I'm not a huge fan of the lace collars. I think the Parma kit from 93, 94 with a 3 and Zola, I'd probably pick to that one. But they're all great in their own way.
Do you think, John, in 20 years' time, 25 years' time, the people will look back at the kits that are produced now by the big manufacturers and think the same about what we think about the 90s? Or perhaps right now, all the kits look pretty much the same. They do have the same pattern. They tend to have foreign sponsors that perhaps we don't quite relate. I mean, in other words, do you think that era has already gone, or there's going to be another golden era?
Yeah, I do. I'm a believer in the kind of cyclical nature of football. And you mentioned it earlier, Danny, when you're chatting to Jonathan about people really being enlightened about football around their 14th birthday. I think shirts have a similar appeal. And so you've got to think people that are 14 now, they're loving the kits that are coming out. I think Macron are doing some great stuff with Sampdoria and Bologna, Capo with Genoa. The new Napoli shirt looks incredible. And so I'm sure there'll be the same nostalgia for those shirts and those moments. And again, it's interesting how things go in cycles, but the McTominay impact in Napoli is kind of bringing Italian football to a second generation of fans in the UK again.
You'll be surprised to hear this, John, but when I've spoken to James Richardson about the effect that Football Italia has had, not just on me, but on the way we perceive overseas football, he still pretends that he doesn't understand how important it was. When I said it to his face, I felt like giving him a very light tap around the back of the head, say, "Come on, guy, catch up with what's happening here." Maybe he's just too modest, something that nobody could ever accuse me of. Listen, John, it's been great talking to you. Let me just remind people what the book is called again. It's called Football Kit Italia, The Greatest Kits and Characters of the Golazo Era. It looks gorgeous. I think that's part of it. Once you see the cover, you'll just say, "I need that." And if you may have to, forego one fish and chip meal to buy it, but I absolutely recommend it to you because it's a feast for the eyes and the football fan. And thank you to John Blair for joining us here on Trans Europe Express, where next Daniele Fisichella will be guiding us through some of the more treacherous rapids approaching teams in the qualifiers for the Champions League. You're still listening to me, Danny Kelly, and him, Daniele Fisichella, here on talkSPORT and Trans-Europe Express. But that's all of our guests got through now. I want a tremendous selection this evening. And don't forget, if you've still got about 10 minutes, if you've got a question for Daniele Fisichella about transfers or anything to do with European football, once again, get in touch. You can get in touch usually through Twitter, at Danny Kelly Words, at talkSPORT, or Daniele's Twitter feed itself. The best dozen or so, maybe half dozen, will get answered between now and midnight. But Daniele, I want to turn our attention now to the ongoing qualification for the European tournaments, the group stages of them particularly. And of course, lots of complicated things are happening at the moment. For a start, you had the issue that in the draws, there's so much tension in Europe, political tension at the moment, that I think there were 7 different examples of where clubs couldn't be drawn against each other because their countries are at daggers drawn. And that's also complicated then by, unlike after the group stages now, which I think is great, but teams are still tumbling through the tournaments. If you fail to get through the qualifiers for the Champions League, you tumble into the Europa League and so on. So it's very, very complicated. But just tell us about some of the big teams who maybe face elimination before we get to the group stages of the Champions League.
If we look at the Champions League, at least one of 2 of last season qualifiers to the round of 16 might be knocked out in a couple of weeks' time, and we're talking about either Benfica or Feyenoord, who are set to face each other in the playoff round after winning their respective matches. Benfica were worthy winners 2-0 in France against Nice, which is a good result for Benfica. Feyenoord, on the other hand, beat on the last minute, 91st minute goal, 2-1 Jose Mourinho Fenerbahce. Feyenoord did extremely well last season, knocking out AC Milan, but because none of these 2 teams have won their respective league, they are in the league path of the playoffs, so they're going to face each other, which means if they both qualify, one of either Benfica or Feyenoord, we're going to drop down into Europa League, making the Europa League, of course, much more competitive than what is now.
Equally, Feyenoord are currently playing Fenerbahce, and if they go through, Fenerbahce going out of the tournament is huge and may have ramifications for one of our most famous managers.
Yes, of course, Mourinho could not play in the Champions League for 2 seasons running in Turkish football, which of course will be huge. Turkish football that has invested a lot, not only Galatasaray, but of course also Fenerbahce. Last season, Mourinho's team were a touch unlucky not to make it into the Champions League, I remember, at the playoff stage. This season looks like the defeat was deserved, but of course it could be just one Turkish team into the Champions League, which would be a blow for a league that has invested a lot. On the other hand, though, next week we could see up to 2 Scottish teams into the playoff round, which is a positive, very, very encouraging for Scotland. Yeah. After Rangers beat comfortably Victoria Pilsen 3-0 at home, so they should able.
That was a great win, wasn't it? That was a really because people were making a case for Pilsen being a banana skin and all the rest of it. But they've already done most of the job with that tremendous 3-0 victory.
Yeah. I mean, it was good midweek with a league that has already started. So obviously the complexity of dealing with 2 games a week, and now obviously Russell Martin's man looking to finish the game off, the qualification off in Czech Republic. They would play the winner of Club Brugge against RB Salzburg. Brugge won 1-0 away. But the game was very, very close. The Austrian had many chances, up to 20 shots on goal on that particular game. And also next week, for sure, in 2 weeks' time for sure, Celtic will be in action, playing either Kairat or Slovan Bratislava. In this case, is the Kazakh team leading 1-0 after the first leg, but Slovan Bratislava, let's not forget, qualified last season to the Champions League proper. And if I am correct, Celtic beat them in the group stage at Celtic Park in the first game. So obviously they would be favorites to make it through the league phase once again.
In the golf in Memphis, both players on the first playoff hole rimmed their shots around the hole. Now JJ Spawn in the second of the sudden death playoffs has just sunk a monster putt. So Justin Rose, I think, has a putt to try and respond, but it looks like advantage the American at this stage. Justin's got a putt of, I would say, I can't judge because of the shadow that he's playing in, maybe 9-10 feet to keep the tournament alive. I'll tell you about that in just a second. One or two lovely oddities. We were discussing on H&J the trip that Shelbourne fans had to make to Karabag, 6,000 kilometres round trip, a much closer tie between clubs from different countries in Scandinavia this week, Daniele.
Yeah, the Öresund Bridge Derby, better known as Malmo Copenhagen.
Justin
first
ran
leg.
that putt in, so it goes to a third sudden death hole. Sorry.
So that's the derby between Malmo and Copenhagen, the two cities,
Amazing.
the Danish capital and Malmo, separated only by a bridge, the Öresund Bridge, which I think is also the subject of a very famous fiction in TV. And first leg unfortunately didn't deliver, unlike the fiction, only 0-0. So it's all to play for Malmo and Copenhagen to try to make it to the playoff round. But also an interesting story is Paphos from Cyprus, who were the only debutant left at this stage of the competition. They won the first leg against Dynamo Kiev away, obviously the game not played in Ukraine, and looking to complete the qualification, which means that there might not be no Ukrainian teams for the first time in many years into the league phase, if Paphos, of course, holds on to the lead.
And the other mad thing that's happened in the qualification earlier for the Champions League, we were all very excited here on the island of Ireland when Linfield from Northern Ireland played Shelbourne from the Republic, and they both are now in another qualification tournament for the Europa League. But the way the draw went, Daniele, if they both lost, then they would meet again in the conference qualifiers. As they plummet down the various tournaments. Now, Linfield have done their bit by losing the first leg, but Shelbourne had very unusual for teams from the Republic of Ireland, had an away win in Croatia. So they're not holding up their end of the bargain. But the idea that it would be another cross-border game between the same two clubs within a fortnight of the previous one it's actually making me laugh, such as the complexity of these European tournaments. And let me ask you, Daniele, because I've had a chance to talk to you about this. As I say, teams are moving from one tournament to another in these qualification rounds. But as we saw last year, they were not parachuting the third place teams out of the Champions League into the Europa League, for instance. And not just because Spurs won it, I thought it gave the competition a purity that was better than the previous setup. What's your view on that?
I totally agree with you. It was a change that was very much needed from UEFA and perhaps long overdue. So it makes sense to remain with the same team from the very start to the end of the competition. Because let's face it, for the teams that dropped from the Champions League to the Europa League and to the Europa League to the Conference League, it almost felt like a demotion, and they didn't perhaps take the competition too seriously until the later stages. And I think, it would be totally unfair. On the other hand, of course, now the teams get demoted much earlier in the season, almost, in deep summer. But of course, the football season starts so early for certain countries that I think actually this gives them the opportunity to play as many competitive games as possible against foreign opposition, which can only be helpful and a good development for them through the years. Really, I think the reform of UEFA of the competition, I think, has been a success. Obviously, UEFA now is introducing more rules from next season to giving teams that finish in the first 4 position in the league phase almost a seeded place guaranteed. So to make sure that they play the second leg at home and to avoid what happened to PSG, for example. But I think this small correction make the competitions much more interesting, much more enjoyable. And ultimately it has worked. Sometimes we do criticize UEFA for getting it wrong, but I must say they got this right. The introduction of the Conference League was a very good idea, and the reform of the competition was a very good idea.
And how is it going down in Italy that next season Italy will have 4 teams in the Champions League, but Spain have 5 and England have 6?
They might see it as an opportunity to regain the 5th place, because it's almost a conundrum when you do have 5 teams. your coefficient points get divided by more teams. So therefore, it's very difficult to maintain the status, especially when last season Italy had a debutant like Bologna in the Champions League. I think is almost seen as a natural evolution. So probably Italy, and that's what my feeling, they are getting used to the idea of almost having a cycle, 1 year on, 1 year off. But of course, participating and doing well in the Champions League can guarantee that the club can build a successful team for the next season and then compete perhaps in the Europa League or Conference League. The most important thing is to get to the later stages of any competition they're involved. And luckily, Italian teams have done it in different shapes of form in the last four or five seasons.
Yeah, poor old England will be having their coefficient divided by 6. So they're really going to have to play very well and get several teams into the latter stages. Not impossible, of course. We're still heading towards the finishing line here on Trans-Europe Express, moving like Usain Bolt, if that's not too old a reference for some of our younger listeners. Next up, we'll be answering some of your questions that you've sent to us via various social media. Daniele will be doing his level best to answer them. Okay, about 10 minutes to go in this edition of Trans-Europe Express. I'll tell you all about the poll in a few minutes' time. But Daniele, the listeners have taken me at my word, and the questions they've sent us are all about Italian football and Italian football history. So clearly they're honing in on your brain power. Let's start. This is a toughie. Luke, the QPR fan. Just 4 words here. Baggio, Del Piero, Totti, question mark.
Okay. Start, sell, sub. I guess that is the game.
Yeah.
Look, I start Roberto Baggio because I think he's been the greatest player in Italian football, and he's been absolutely magnificent, a player that has played through pain, through injuries, through fatigue, and he's been an icon of Italian football. So I start him. As a sub, I have Francesco Totti because he's a number 10 that has reinvented the role of number 10, also playing basically a number 10, scoring like a number 9, and the passing and the finesse and I mean, it's been incredible, but also the physical strength as well. And unfortunately,
his determination to win football matches, amazing,
extremely amazing. And unfortunately, I need to sell Alessandro Del Piero, not because I dislike him, because then people clip this, but he's just the third. Is the third.
It was an impossible list. That was very good, Luke.
No, it's impossible. It's impossible.
Now, listen, Nathan, the Liverpool fan, says, guys, which young Italian talent should we be looking to keep an eye on in the coming season?
One of them, probably you might already know him, is called Giovanni Leoni. He's an 18 years old centre back, plays for Parma. Last season was his breakthrough season. If he doesn't make a big move to a big team, and I know some Premier League side are already interested in him as well as Inter, and he stay at Parma. Look if he confirms himself. He's very quick, reads the game really well. The other one is Simone Pafundi, 19 years old. He was called up by Roberto Mancini when he was only 16 into the national team. He has had various loan spells, but finally is back at his parent club, which is Udinese. This should be his season. He is considered the biggest talent in his generation. And another one is a midfielder, which I really look forward to seeing play more regularly. Cendur used to play for PSG, now plays for Fiorentina. He's Italian. He was good at the under-21 European Championship. I think if Fiorentina and Stefano Pioli gives him enough credit and enough time, he could be a good revelation. I mean, very good physically, good, well on the ball. So yeah, those three: Leoni, Pafundi, Cendur.
Neil, the Bournemouth fan, asks, question for Daniele here, thank goodness. He says, which non-Italian player has made the biggest impact on Serie A history? And then he's given me a list to help you: Maradona, Zidane, and Ronaldo Nazario, the proper Ronaldo. Or is there someone else?
Clearly Maradona, Neil, because Maradona has played of all these players the longest in Italy. I think he's played 6 or 7 seasons. Zidane and Ronaldo didn't play as much, maybe 6 or 7 seasons together. And Maradona has won 2 Scudettos at Napoli in the 80s, breaking the power of the big teams from the north. And he has elevated a city and a club to heights that were unthinkable, and has completely transformed the team, the club, the city, the region. So yes, the cultural and socio-economic impact of Maradona has been really beyond imagination. Zidane had a good career at Juventus, but the best Zidane we've seen was at Real Madrid, of course. And Ronaldo Nazario da Lima, unfortunately, was plagued by the injury at Inter, although the season 97-98 will probably be the best debut season for a foreigner in Italy ever, but I'm going to go with Diego Armando Maradona.
And finally, on this, if I may, this is from Sean, who's a Luton Town supporter. Sure. He says, great show, gents. So he's a good judge. He says, love for you to answer this question. What's the greatest Serie A title race of all time?
I'm going to go down to 2 title races next to each other. 2000, 2001, also famous for the washout of Perugia. Juventus and Lazio go into the last game of the season. Juventus is 1 point ahead of Lazio. Juventus just need to win against Perugia away from home, and Perugia's got nothing to play. Lazio plays at home and, of course, wins as much. Juventus are drawing, but out of a sudden the sky opens and there is a rainfall that's never seen before. Pierluigi Collina, the referee, suspends the match, and then it gets replayed almost an hour later when Lazio's game is already finished, and Juventus loses 1-0 and loses the Scudetto. And that's in 2001. The following year, 2001-2002, Inter goes to Roma playing against Lazio, 1 point ahead of Juve and 2 points ahead of Roma. Same situation. Lazio plays almost for nothing. The Stadio Olimpico is pretty much the Inter Milan stadium with all the fans, but Inter manages to lose that game the 5th of May 2002, and Juventus winning away wins the Scudetto, and actually Inter finishes third, having started the day as first, because also Roma wins away. So it was a 3-horse race until the very last day of the season, something that has never happened before. And if I wasn't an Inter fan, I would wish to relive all over again. But unfortunately, it's a very painful memory for me. But I think it's the greatest title race ever.
Listen, those are great answers. Thank you very much for the questions, all of you. In the golf, they're on to the third hole of the playoffs. So both players are got holeable putts, so it's tight. Justin Rose will go first, I think. I've got to say thank you very, very much indeed, Daniele. That was just great. Thank you so much for all that you've done over the last 3 hours. I want to thank you all for listening as well. Let me just tell you, of course, now Trans Europe Express will be accelerating into the new season, but the radar figures, which are really the sort of listening figures, it's called radar, and my producer has told me that they are very, very, very good. We don't want to go mad because you always want to leave room for improvement, and I am prone to exaggeration anyway, but they're very, very good. That's down to our production team of Jack and Harjot and Kitch. It's down to Andy Brassell, without whose genius this programme wouldn't be as good. And I'll take whatever flowers are coming my way as well.
It's down to you as well, of course.
Mostly, though, thank you all for listening, because what's the point? Otherwise, we're just howling into a void. Exactly. In our poll, so thank you again. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. In our poll tonight, most of you, the majority of you, think that Ousmane Dembele should be winning the Ballon d'Or. Coming up next here on talkSPORT, it's After the Lights Go Out with Michael Chopra. I'll be back tomorrow at about 2:30 with H and J, the latest my postcards from Ireland. Until then, God bless you all and good night.